Welcome to the Lab to Table podcast, brought to you by Mariu Nutrisciences. In a world where the food industry is constantly evolving, we're here to help you break down the complexities. Join us as we sit down with some of the industry's leading experts to tackle critical food safety updates, decode shifting consumer trends, and deliver the actionable insights you need to stay ahead.
Joining us today is one of the most respected voices in food safety. With over 30 years of experience, she's held C-suite and executive leadership roles at industry titans, and today she serves as the VP of Technical Services at Mariu Nutrisciences, where she oversees auditing and certification. She also holds a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of South Carolina. Please welcome Tracey Sheehan.
Thanks, Mark, and happy to be here.
Before we jump into it, can you give us a little bit of information on your background in the industry?
In the food industry, I started out in the laboratory of a large food manufacturer and was helping out with the quality department, and eventually moved into that department. And we conducted a lot of supplier audits in the U.S. and globally, and that gave me an insight into how supplier auditing is done effectively. And have worked in three large major global food companies that did supplier auditing and also required GFSI audits of their suppliers. In the last company I was in, we got to 97% GFSI compliant with our supplier audits, which very proud of that. And then I was requested by Mariu Nutrisciences to come and help out on the certification and auditing team.
Tracey, you have sat on both sides of the table, both on the manufacturing side and now as a service provider for certification and supplier audits. What is the biggest misconception food manufacturers still have about supplier audits?
Our supplier audits are provided with two different methodologies. We have some very large quick service restaurants and retailers and manufacturers who want us to use their internally developed checklists with specific auditor training. However, many customers come to us just needing supplier audits and they don't know where to start. So we build a customized audit checklist tailored to their specific food safety and quality needs.
So, Tracey, when you're reviewing a supplier, what are the subtle red flags that don't necessarily show up on a certificate? So, is there a specific situation or behavior that makes you pause?
Well, I'll start with the GFSI benchmark process and the certification program owner checklists like SQF, BRCGS, FSSC, and IFS are intended to standardize the critical food safety requirements globally for all manufacturing sites. I remember when there was no standardization and the variability between supplier food safety was extreme, to say the least. Now we see companies wanting to target their supplier audits to specific needs, such as adherence to their quality specification or confirmation of their food safety testing requirements for ready-to-eat ingredient sourcing. Most findings on supplier audits happen on the floor, where the site may have challenges with implementation of their HACCP plan or their preventive control measures.
So, how do you audit food safety culture? Is that an actual measurable or is it, just a buzzword?
Well, in a broad sense, food safety culture and management commitment are the two most important factors in protecting consumers from foodborne illness, allergic reactions, and foreign material. Companies who train all employees on food safety, they encourage all employees to report issues, and they actively fix the issues are much more likely to prevent a crisis situation. So measurement of food safety culture during the audit can include a wide variety of tactics, such as food safety competency, which can be gauged through interviews of employees, say doing critical control point checks, measuring the time to implement food safety repairs that are identified, looking at capital investment for implementing new preventive equipment for food safety, or management of testing results like environmental monitoring, corrective actions.
Can a good audit program actually predict or prevent a recall, or are they just lagging indicators?
A good audit program can identify opportunities for improvement in food safety and quality to enhance the overall business. We've had specific cases where our auditors actually detected a situation that led the company immediately deciding to make a voluntary recall. However, I would caution that an audit is a short window in time during the whole year that the business operates. So, a strong food safety culture and management commitment are actually what prevent food safety instances and recalls in the long run.
We are seeing more risks with food fraud and economically motivated alteration. How would our audit frameworks evolve to catch these things that aren't safety issues, but integrity issues?
Well, I want to start with the GFSI organization because they create a set of benchmark criteria for audit schemes to follow. They define food fraud as the deliberate and intentional substitution, addition, pampering, or misrepresenting of food, ingredients, or packaging. And really, those GFSI standards are specific requirements that get embedded into the certification audits, and they require a documented food fraud management plan. They require measures to be implemented to mitigate public health risks from identified food fraud vulnerabilities. And, based on my experience in the industry, it's advantageous for companies to also include randomized testing of high risk ingredients on hold. Always test when you're on hold prior to usage, and also notify your suppliers that you're randomly testing their ingredients for food fraud. That kind of puts them on notice.
So, if you could change one thing about how the food industry conducts supplier audits, what would it be?
Very large companies typically conduct a risk assessment for managing their thousands of suppliers, as our teams did when I was in the food industry. I would encourage thinking about that risk assessment sort of multidimensionally. You want to include food safety risks, such as previous recalls. You want to include microbiological risks, like ready to eat ingredients added to your product that you're not going to have a further heat step, chemical risks and allergen risks, and also foreign material risks. Then think of other risks like food fraud that we mentioned earlier, country of origin, ingredient volume that you're buying, variability in quality of the ingredients, and even cybersecurity risks. I mean, you're giving the supplier your specification, and how are they protecting that? The supplier relationship is also somewhat undervalued in that, it used to be you bought from somebody locally that you knew and trusted. And so building up a relationship with your suppliers has a big impact on food safety. And really, it minimizes the risk to your own business. And then once the risk assessment is completed, then we work with clients to design a more targeted and effective audit based on their risk assessment. Oh, and if you need help with the risk assessment, our consulting team has experts who can conduct the risk assessment for you or train your team on how to conduct a risk assessment.
So, Tracy, you mentioned cybersecurity. You're handing over a lot of data, all your specifications to the supplier. How have you seen that concern change over the last decade or so?
Well, just like the what's in the public domain, cybersecurity is getting much more critical in terms of risk to the food industry. And for example, you see software companies who are now being accredited to certain cybersecurity standards. We actually trained our auditors who typically conduct food safety audits to ask cybersecurity questions on how they're storing your specifications, how they're managing the information that you've entrusted to your suppliers in their data systems, and what they're doing to prevent cybersecurity breaches that could be detrimental to their supply consistency, or could be ransomed. So we have a number of questions that we can include in an audit. That's a little bit of a new twist for us. We typically were focused on food safety and quality, but I think the cybersecurity is becoming a lot hotter topic these days.
Tracy, just a couple quick questions to wrap things up. What is your best piece of advice for a quality manager stressing about an upcoming audit?
Oh, that's a good question. I really think that the internal audit or an external audit should not be the sole responsibility of the quality manager. Because in a facility with high food safety culture, everyone is responsible and knows their own role in protecting food safety. In a facility with high management commitment, all managers of all departments participate in the audit process, so including maintenance or sanitation or operations. So it's not just the quality manager walking around with the auditor. And also, those managers, they participate in the root cause analysis to identify both the corrective actions of the audit and, more importantly, to implement preventive measures so those findings don't reoccur. Audits are a lot like complaints, I like to say. Most people tend to look at them as negative, but in fact, in reality, they're sort of a gift because they allow us to improve our food safety and quality for our consumers.
That was some good advice for a quality manager. What would you say, the same question, but for a plant manager stressing about an upcoming audit?
I think it's key for all plant managers and, CEOs for that matter, to make sure that they understand the audit. They are involved in the opening meeting. They're involved during the audit and especially at the closing meeting because they need to hear what the auditor has to share about the findings for their continuous improvement. And I think the better management commitment is, it shows that the plant manager is there for their team and not just sitting in an office.
Tracey, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today. We really appreciate your time and would love to see you again.
Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure.